Going to discuss about the deficient demand. So in our previous video already we discussed about the excess demand. So today we will discuss about the deficient demand. What is the meaning of deficient demand? Deficient demand means what? When AD is less than AS, it means aggregate demand is less than aggregate supply, then this is called the deficient demand. Now see the definition. So first, deficient demand. Deficient demand refers to the situation when AD is less than AS corresponding to full employment level of output in the economy. Okay, so very simple. So aggregate demand is less than aggregate supply. So it means when aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply, then this is called excess demand. And when AD is less than AS, then this is called the deficient demand. Now you see, because of this deficient demand, deflationary gap arises. Clear? Because of deficient demand, deflationary gap arises. What is deflationary gap? The gap by which actual AD falls short of the AD required to establish the full employment equilibrium. It means the gap between the actual AD and the AD required to full employment. This gap is called the deflationary gap. What is deflation? Decrease in price of the commodity. It means increase the value of money or decrease the value of a commodity. This is called the deflation, opposite of inflation. Clear? So first, deficient demand means what? When AD is less than AS. Because of AD less than AS, it means deficient demand, deflationary gap arises. Now you see the diagram. In this diagram, OX denotes income, output and employment. Then OY denote aggregate demand. In here, 45-degree angle, this is the aggregate supply curve or income curve. This AD, have you seen? AD, C plus I, this is the original, actually this is the curve. Which one? This curve. AD required to establish full employment equilibrium level. This is the AD C plus I. And actual AD. Here which one is the actual AD curve? AD1. C plus I plus minus delta I. So when you have seen that AD curve shift to the left side, then there is a gap between the actual AD. Actual AD means which one? AD1 is the actual aggregate demand curve, and this AD means the required AD for full employment. So you have seen that actually this AD C plus I is required for full employment, but actually actual AD is AD1. So this gap between actual aggregate demand curve and aggregate demand curve required for full employment, this gap is called the deflationary gap. EZ is the deflationary gap. Is it clear? So in this diagram, aggregate demand ADC plus I, this is required for full employment. Is it clear? ADC plus I required for full employment. And AD1 C plus I minus AD is the actual aggregate demand curve. So this gap, the gap between these AD and AD1 is called the deflationary gap. And this point you know full employment equilibrium. Is it clear? So what is inflationary gap? The gap between actual aggregate demand curve and aggregate demand curve required for full employment. In here, please remember, AD is the aggregate demand curve required for full employment, but AD1 is the actual demand. So this gap is called the deflationary gap. Is it? reasons for deficient demand. So already we discussed the reason for excess demand. The same point, just you do the opposite. For example, decrease in propensity to consume. If your propensity to consume decreases, then definitely you will consume less. When consumption is less means what? Demand is less. So when less demand, then deficient demand. Is it clear? So when decrease in propensity to consume means when we demand less, then AD is less than AS demand and deficient demand. Simple. Increase in tax. When government imposed more tax on the product, on a commodity, then what will happen? It will increase the price of the commodity. Then people will buy less. It means demand less. So deficient demand. Number 3, decrease in government expenditure. If government decrease their expenditure for development or for other reasons, then it will decrease our income and it will decrease the consumption, or it will the impact on the demand, and which is the reason for deficient demand. Very simple. Fall in investment expenditure. So when investment decreases, then people will get job, people will get less work opportunity. It will decrease their income, so they will be not able to demand for more product and ultimately demand the deficiency. Rise in import. So we know that import means what? Outgoing. Export is incoming. So when we import more, then we will demand less for our domestic product, and it will be the demand deficiency. Fall in export. When fall in export is less income, because export means incoming. When we export something, then we receive the money, but now less export, it means we have less income. So we will demand more and it will lead to the deficient demand. Simple. Impact of deficit demand. First is effect on output. Due to lack of sufficient aggregate demand, there will be an increase in inventory stock. It will force farms to plan for lesser production for the subsequent period. As a result, planned output will fall. Simple. Is it clear what is the impact of demand deficiency or deficient demand on output? Output will fall. Number 2, effect on employment. Deficient demand causes involuntary unemployment in the economy due to fall in the planned output. So it means it will create involuntary unemployment. Why? Due to fall in the planned output. So when output decreases, it means they have planned for less output. Definitely they have to cut the employment. Is it clear? So in lockdown we have seen so many people lost their job. Why? Because they cut the employment because of less demand. Okay, so this is the practical example. And the last is effect on general price level. Very simple. When there is less demand or demand decreases, then definitely price will decrease. General price level will fall due to lack of demand for goods and services in the economy. Okay, so this is all about the deficient demand. So quickly you see what is deficient demand. When aggregate demand is less than aggregate supply. Because of deficient demand, deflationary gap arises. What is deflationary gap? The gap between actual aggregate demand curve and aggregate demand required for full employment. In our example, AD1 is the actual aggregate demand and AD is the aggregate demand curve, aggregate demand required for full employment. So we have seen that this gap, this gap EZ, this is called the deflationary gap. Very simple. Okay. Then reasons for deficient demand, already we discussed, like decrease in propensity to consume. If you consume less, then less demand. So demand deficiency. Increase in taxes, more tax, more price. So demand will decrease. So deficient demand. Decrease in government expenditure. So when government will spend less, then the demand for government also decreases for goods and services. So deficient demand. Falling investment, less job, less income. Then deficient demand. Rise in import. It means that it will decrease the consumption of our domestic product. Deficient demand. Fall in export. It means less income, so less demand, deficient demand. And the impact on output, definitely output will fall or decrease. Effect on employment, same thing, involuntary unemployment will increase. And the last is effect on general price level. So definitely price will decrease because of less aggregate demand. Okay, so this is all about the demand deficiency or deficient demand. So I hope you understood this lesson, but if you have any problem, let me know in the